IAS Academy, your one-stop destination for enabling your UPSC dream to become a reality. Having said that, I welcome you to today's daily news analysis segment with me, where we walk you through the most important prelims and mains news which are important from the UPSC perspective, and of course majorly to build up your knowledge and confidence for the upcoming UPSC CSE exam 2025. And before we begin having a look at today's important news pieces, let's motivate you. And today's motivation says, don't let self-doubt come in between you and your success, because many times, more often, we always doubt our capacity. We always believe that success is a remote target. That's only because we lack confidence. So if your preparation is spot on, if you have worked hard, then absolutely you will shape your destiny. There's nothing that can stop you. And on that motivating quote, let's now proceed with today's news agenda. And here I have about 5 important articles from you which have been picked up. They have been curated and cherry-picked from the Hindu Hyderabad edition and the Indian Express New Delhi edition for today, 22nd April 2025, while the first 2 articles here correspond to your mains exam, which means we are going to do a deep dive into these articles, of course, because they contain some very important clues for answer writing. All of them are important for your GS paper 2, 3 and 4. With regards to the last 3 articles, article 3rd, 4th and 5th, these are making news and hence they have been picked up from prelims perspective. So we shall give you a 360-degree insight into what does the article really talk about. But at the same time, let's also have a look at some probable prelims questions that could be made out of these articles. Having said that, let me quickly walk you through the first article for the day today. The article is completely Indian economy based, but at the same time it also talks about India's rich cultural heritage. Now we all know that India is not only a polycultural diverse country, but also a country where every region is a hub of creativity. But the article highlights 2 major problems which are leading to the wastage of a demographic dividend. Now we all know that India has young population, average age being around 28, which means one of the youngest population across the world. Not only this, given the fact that we have had a history of traditional handicrafts, artisan work, art and culture, various kind of culinary geniuses coming from different places in India, which is also symbolized by our GI tag initiative, which is symbolized by our one district, one product initiative, which is also symbolized by agencies like TriFed. All these highlight how India is a hotbed of different communities dealing with different unique potential of creativity. And hence, we should be a thriving economy. Of course, today we are talking about enhancing vocational skills. So, which country can do better at that now? Definitely we should be very successful given the wide array of our traditional handicraft sector, art and craft sector, but that's not happening. We are not able to tap into this potential. Why? So the article says, if today we are not able to tap the potential of a creative economy, then why? What's the reason? And is there a solution? Can we make new pathways, which means can we make new ways, new solutions to mitigate this problem? Can we tap our young demographic dividend, which is so talented and so creative, so innovative? That's what the article says. And the major 2 problems that the article points out to, one, very clearly explicit, written in the article itself, that most of the communities in India, be they rural communities, be they women groups, be they remote tribal communities, all of them practice some traditional art and craft. When sold into the market, it could lead to massive rewards in international global market. But that doesn't happen. Why? It's not happening, one, because these people have an access to very poor level of market reach. They do not have access. One thing. Second thing is they do not have any awareness about intellectual property rights. When they do not know how to institutionally sell their products, package their products, reach out to the right consumers online and offline, it's very easy for them to become victims of biopiracy. Now, this is a hidden theme in the article. Of course, you will not see it explicitly in the article, but that's exactly a hidden theme coming out, that today there is biopiracy as well. We know that today in the US markets or in the European markets, you get products very nicely packed and shelved and costing you thousands of dollars and euros. At the end of the day, these are all related to Indian pharmaceutical products. They are all a product of tribal wisdom and tribal knowledge, whether it's some very special curative kind of a herb or a root tree, or it's things like turmeric or any other kind of spice or any other kind of dried plant that is typically the knowledge of Indian heritage, but then it's not sold in India as much. These people never get rewarded. Those who have given this idea and craft, then who's getting rewarded? Companies who come, they do a tourism, and then they catch these ideas and go and sell them and then patent them. Why? Because it's our communities who have the talent, and yet they do not have the awareness of getting their knowledge either copyrighted, or they are not able to get it indexed as an intellectual property right. So this is one big problem article talks about, and therefore there is a pure wastage. Can we do something about it? Let's see. Proceeding further in the article, yes, please understand that it's very relevant for UPSC, specifically for your GS paper 2 and 3, because on the one hand, it talks about IPR, that's intellectual property rights. On the other hand, it also talks about how, based on these unique arts, crafts, and cultural knowledges, we can promote startup culture. We can have business houses, which will in turn boost our economy. So it's also related to economic growth corresponding to your GS paper 3 UPSC mains. There is a question I want to show you from UPSC 2015 just to prove my point about the importance of the article. The question says, success of the Make in India program depends on the success of Skill India program and the radical labor reforms discussed with logical arguments. We know that this question is talking about the National Skill Development Mission. We know that this question talks about how the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative of giving Indian population not only jobs, but giving them the skill to find the right kind of jobs in the formal economy or becoming entrepreneurs. That's the solution. Now, there is another very interesting theme that comes into picture here. A lot of people say that despite India being such an integral component of the global market, why majority of our workforce is still engaged in the informal sector? One clear reason is that we have a massive population. It is sometimes very difficult for all the workforce or all the working age population to find jobs in the formal sector of the economy. And therefore the government came up with a solution in 2015 itself, that why not have a Skill India mission? Why not reinvigorate the startup culture? Because if we cannot accommodate everyone in the formal market, then at least we can convert them into entrepreneurs. And no wonder the concept of giving seed fund to startups, giving women a 10% rights or reservation of that fund, creating skills among people, promoting vocational education through the new education policy 2020, or inculcating a culture of self-help groups in urban and rural poor. Now, all these point out to one thing: if you cannot give them a job, give them skill. So that's why even the question talks about the same thing. Yes, we have potential, we have creativity, we have ideas. That's called a creative economy. But is that giving results? No. That is something that's missing. So now the article clearly tells you that India has always had a very rich culture of creativity and innovation. So we are not saying that it has a culture of investment and economic growth throughout, because there is a gap. Of course, we have the ability to innovate, but is that translating into money? Is that translating into entrepreneurship? Now that's a problem here. So talking about India's rich history of innovation and creativity, let's go back to a little bit history. Now you might remember that during colonial period, it was the British who completely lopsided India's economy by making us an outlet for raw material and a very good open market for finished products. But what about before the British came? So for India, unlike what a lot of people feel, industrialization and urbanization were not always colonial products, no. In fact, in India, experiences of urbanization and industrialization had begun during the Iron Age itself. We are talking about the 5th and the 6th century BCs. It was during that time that in India new towns were coming up. We had artisans, we had workers creating wonderful textiles and beautiful handicrafts. In fact, Europe was one of the biggest markets of that. So we had that innovation from that time itself. Unfortunately, after British induced industrialization, which led to a factory mode of production, which led to the dominance of a class that was very familiar in formal education and English Western education, our traditional handicraft sector died down. Today we are facing the repercussion of that. Of course, it's a historical harm that we are talking about, because today our country is poised to become the $5 trillion economy very soon. So why are we missing out on this one important aspect, the creative economy? So today we could definitely scale up on our creative potential, but even before we see how, it's important to understand then what is creative economy technically. So any economy that works, or any economy in which a major concept or the major component of GDP is coming from innovation and creativity, that's called a creative economy simply. It involves sectors such as your knowledge, something to do with your thinking and your mind. Of course, we talk about IPR, intellectual property. Of course, we talk about things like the software sector, art and design sector. Sectors like handloom, sectors like textile, sectors like architecture. Of course, we are talking about media. Now, all these, some of them are hard skill based, some of them are soft skill industries, but all of these show the creative potential of a demography, of a population. There is a global demand for sure. And India has a ready supply of labor because we have both. The labor power, the human resource, and of course we have the innovation ability, and yet there is a gap. Why? As I said, there are leakages. What are these leakages? Let's quickly see. Now, one of the biggest leakage, we'll come back to this point later. Let's see one of the biggest leakage. The biggest leakage or the biggest problem is lack of sufficient capital. There is a lack of money. Lack of money for all these people, groups of people and communities who have the innovation talent, who have beautiful and very, very productive ideas in art, architecture, research, designs, software. But they do not have money to scale them up. They do not have money to commercialize that. Specifically the rural poor. It's the rural talent that doesn't find any light because of lack of money. Institutional credit is a major problem. Now this leads us to understand a whole different concept called lack of poor credit absorption capacity. It's a very different point, so we'll come back to it in a very major way some other time. But as of now, we can understand that there is a deficiency, there is a paucity of institutional credit among the rural poor. If you have an idea, but you do not have access to any institutional loans given by banks because your absorption capacity is poor, or maybe you do not have sufficient access to microfinancing mechanisms, that's when your ideas will never see the light of the day. It needs investment to grow. You might have often seen all these TV programs that are making rounds called the Shark Tank India. Now these again are very beautiful reminders of how sometimes lack of funding also pushes talent to dust. So that's one problem. Of course, we have a very, very weak intellectual property right protection mechanism. As I said, there is tremendous biopiracy going on. Not only at the global level, at the domestic level too. It's often the rich, well-heeled, multinational companies, private companies, big entrepreneurs who are able to steal away the ideas from poor people, tribal people, women groups, village people, and then they sell it off, they commercialize on it. Now that's a major problem because these people, because of lack of awareness, they aren't able to go and patent their ideas. That's a big problem. Another problem is lack of institutional guidance to scale up your ideas. Of course, we have the National Skill Development Mission. Of course, we had the Skill India program back in 2015. We had the Startup India program, but they have done little to support the people in real need. One is lack of awareness. Another, of course, is that there is poor financial disbursement of funds. So that's a problem. Third thing is difficult protocols. There is too much paperwork sometimes, or too much protocol work to be done which many people do not have access to or awareness about. That keeps them from enjoying the benefits of these initiatives. Another problem, of course, is very, very poor investment priorities. Say, for example, when we claim that why don't we encourage people who have innovation capacities, then why don't we encourage those who have innovation capacities which can also be climate friendly? Now here I'll give you a good example. Let's Pop back to the previous slide. Now we remember this called Mansukh Bhai. Years before, he had created a wonderful intervention called the Miticool refrigerator. Owing to the very poor heat conditions in Rajasthan, came this very refreshing development where there was a refrigerator providing cool drinking water to people without the need of electricity. So that's what we mean by innovation. When ideas like that start getting patented and they get copyrighted, there is no biopiracy. The local people also get enhanced. Of course, they get encouragement to create many such more initiatives. Then we have the example of the pedal operated washing machine. Again, a very sustainable solution that doesn't need any energy. Similarly, we talk about the amphibious bicycle. That's a very important transportation invention. Again, very eco-friendly, very cost-friendly. Similarly, I'll give you a few more examples here. Now, let's talk about Meghalaya. Meghalaya is very often in the news about women empowerment, about the beautiful ecology, about the Garo, Khasi, Jaintia tribes and relief features. But also remember that Meghalaya is one place which has tremendous scope of farming, inventions. Say for example, there's a very popular technology called the bamboo drip agriculture. We can say that rural farmers in Meghalaya have been using it for so long now. Agriculture irrigation without the need of any electric or solar pump. Imagine how eco-friendly would that be by using traditional mechanisms like bamboo roots. Similarly, there is another very famous technology referred to as the bun. The bun system. So whether it's the bamboo drip, whether it's the bun system, we see how these innovations, if they are given any institutional loaning for scaling up, if they are popularized, if they are made common practices, if they are given right intellectual property protection, then of course India will be a very outlying economy because we have huge talent. So just fill the gap and let the economy grow, let the people grow, and let the dependence on formal education and formal sector be reduced too. Because for every innovation, for every huge business idea, you do not need a formal certification. What you need is creativity, innovation. What we lack is research and development. So that's exactly what the article is talking about. Now, another very good example the article gives you is the Antrodem project from Indonesia. The article says that how this one idea coming from Indonesia that is based on the use of Indian harvester ants leads to controlling of floods, annual floods. Why? Because it completely uses the nature. It copies the natural processes, ecosystem processes to create something that's man-made. You might have heard about words like a circular economy. You might have heard words like forests are very good case studies for development. That was also one essay topic that had come in 2022. We are saying the same thing. Why can't we work on the basis of biomimicry? Why can't we copy the biological, ecological systems and see how much can we imitate? How much can we learn from that? It's a zero waste mechanism, right? It's also a way in which you can make innovations, technological innovations too, which do not need energy, and yet they generate employment, yet they generate profit. They are also consumer friendly. They are easy to understand. So what will be the outcome? Student-led innovations like the Antrodem project could sometimes create such a big solution to the problem of flooding completely, okay? So in India, we need some such interventions. That's what the article is saying. Now, what's the way forward? If that's the problem, what's the solution? Solution is very clear. One thing is we absolutely need commercial, banking, government-based, which is institutional, some formal support for all these people and communities who are trying to create innovative business solutions. Second thing is these interventions like the grassroots innovation augmentation network. That's a good example of how people at the rural, at the grassroots level can come together and make solutions to problems like this. Another very good solution is just like you have the one district, one product program, why can't we have a one district, one innovation program? Let's see, let's try to tag it. Let's create a geographical index type of a model to promote local innovations. I think that's going to be a very major boost in the arm for people to innovate. And ultimately, we have to think about the local economy based innovations, because using imported expensive technology is never sustainable in the long run, which also gives us two more ideas here. Now, talking about solutions, of course, we have another mechanism that is known as sui generis. Sui generis happens when we understand that we have to create a network, a community network, so that people have an easy access to intellectual property right and patenting. Say there are people who have ideas and they have a lack of awareness regarding how to protect these ideas from biopiracy. Of course, we have the sui generis model. And then we can also talk about a model where nodal agencies can be created based out of rural local communities. They could come together, they could form a kind of a cooperative and then work towards legal solutions, work towards creating an IPR system so that these rights can be protected. Okay, so that's exactly what the article overall talks about. And now we can absolutely hop off to the other article of the day. Again, this is coming from your climate or ecology segment, and the article says climate change is leading to a rise in arsenic levels in rice. So again, we are talking about one huge anthropogenic problem that has disturbed food cycles across the world. Now, why does a cereal upon which majority of global community is dependent, because rice happens to be the most popular staple diets for people across the globe. And in that light, today if we say that there is an element of poisoning, there is an element of arsenic that's very poisonous, it is very carcinogenic in nature, it could trigger huge and mortal level of non-communicable diseases. If a food like rice, that's the most popular food among people, it's a staple diet for people, farmers get their income from rice cultivation. In India also it's a very well-known kharif crop. Of course now it's also being grown in the Rabi season, given the huge dependence on rice, specifically when you talk about the decades post your Green Revolution of 1960s. Having said that, if a food item like that gets corrupted with a chemical as dangerous as arsenic, what would that mean for the prospects of global food security in future? What does it mean when we talk about the quality of our soil and groundwater, and what ramifications is it going to have on the population, the health of our people? So all these things are under consideration in this article, but all in all, let's remember that whether you see GS paper 3 and you talk about conserving environment, or whether you talk about how excessive use of chemical fertilizers or the change of climate, global warming and lack of biodiversity, all these things are resulting in this kind of food contamination. So blames can be so many. There can be so many problems. It's a Pandora's box. But the result is very threatening, because having a basic staple food getting poisonously contaminated could mean absolutely a very dangerous future for the world communities. Okay, so that's what the article talks about. Here's a quick UPSC PYQ to show you that how this article's topic is relevant. This is 2021. It says, which of the following can be found as pollution creating elements or pollutants in the drinking water in some parts of India? One is arsenic, then it's sorbitol, then it's fluoride, then it's formaldehyde, and of course it's uranium. Now all these chemicals are typically very common in the industrial belts, particularly where mining is very prominent. In fact, there was a study done by the World Health Organization along with the government of Italy just 2 years before, I think that was 2023, post-pandemic, which said that a lot of tribal communities in India, coming from states like Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, West Bengal, there women are experiencing very unique kind of reproductive problems. Women aren't fertile anymore. There's a loss of fertility. Of course, we know that's a whole different debate. The fact that India's replacement level fertility is dying down very, very fast. But one very threatening perspective could be these women here, because many of them have reported cancers of the reproductive system. Now, suddenly, a group of women who have no history of any kind of poor food consumption or chemical laced food consumption or any kind of junk food consumption or alcoholism, why would they suddenly register a high amount of thyroid, reproductive disorders, cancers? So when the research was conducted, it was found that the underground water, the groundwater of these tribal belts is heavily contaminated with bromium, bromide, chromium, uranium, arsenic. So that's why they were experiencing all these kind of scary diseases. So imagine the burden that it has on the GDP of your country. Of course, imagine the kind of labor loss that it gives birth to. So it's a complete collapse of food systems and health systems together. That's what the question talks about, and that's also something that the article talks about. Now here we are talking about a Lancet Planetary Health study which says that climate change, increasing heat waves, melting of glaciers, of course, the melting down of ice caps, forest fires, lack of biodiversity, microplastic in human food. So all these point out to how there is a high level of toxin called arsenic in rice, and by 2050 it could become very dangerous. It could become fatal for people, specifically the Asian people, because Asian countries are more rice consuming and rice growing countries, by the way. Okay, so just a quick look about arsenic. Arsenic, of course, important for your GS paper 3. It is a kind of metalloid which comes in organic as well as inorganic forms. Now, when we talk about inorganic, then it's very, very toxic to human body, very carcinogenic, very pathological, dangerous, and it's often found in the groundwater. So imagine people who do not have access to water filtration or the modern complex or very, very sophisticated systems of water cleaning. What would they do in case they depend on this groundwater, which they do for irrigating their crops, for cleaning, washing? Ultimately, it's creeping down your food system. That's dangerous. Talking about organic arsenic, perhaps it's a little less dangerous, but then it's also found in seafood. Again, that's dangerous because most of our coastal communities are seafood dependent in a big way. Okay, so talking about all these, here are just a few ideas to show you exactly where do you find arsenic. So talking about the natural sources, we can have it in the volcanic activity, you can have it in the groundwater, it's found in various kind of rocks. But what's more problematic is anthropogenic sources. Now, anthropogenic means anything that's caused by human action. Okay, so anthropogenic means when we use pesticides for farming, which we do, when we do mining, when we talk about fossil fuels and harvesting. Now, just the day before when I had a session with you, we were talking about energy, renewable energy, and there we had a chapter on how India is planning to find rare earth elements because China has planned to cut it down. Today also a newspaper article talks about that. So there I was telling you that it's not very easy to go and just start excavating these metals. Because although it looks very nice that okay, now we have the capacity, let's extract more rare earth metal, let's find more radioactive substances, and then we can be self-sufficient. Atmanirbhar Bharat. Sounds good, right? But what about the hidden cost? What about the latent cost of extracting, excavation? That also is very, very threatening to the ecology and to the people who do that. Typically your informal workers. It's the live standing example of social dumping. Now, what's social dumping? See, that's UPSC. One idea leads to another. We'll come back to it some other time. Just understand something that's very exploitative to people who do it. So it's not a very easy thing to think about, okay? So therefore, whenever you excavate any rare earth element or whenever you go behind excavating a radioactive element, you know it will also lead to arsenic contamination. If arsenic is so dangerous, then how does it enter your rice? Why? Because rice is one kind of crop, which is very water intensive. What is water intensive? A food crop or a crop that needs lots of water, logging of water, a pool of water to grow. You might have seen in documentaries, you should see documentaries by the way. Okay, so in documentaries which talk about farming practices, you will see that there is a whole big pool, channel of water, and in that channel of water you see rice growing. So what happens? It needs a lot of water collection. So because of that, it's easy for the groundwater toxins to penetrate into that pool of water and therefore it seeps into your soil. Ultimately, it is entering the root of the rice crop and it goes into human body and then food chain. It becomes a part of your integrated food web completely. Second thing is groundwater contamination. In most of the Asian countries which are highly industrializing, now remember by 2050, there are two places in the world which are not only going to industrialize very fast but also urbanize very fast. One of course is Asia, another is Africa. So when we talk about two places which are very virgin right now, as in they are very, very prone to seeing more urbanization, more industrialization as per the United Nations, there will always be dangers of climate compromise. And that's what we are talking about. There is a high level of groundwater contamination. Inorganic arsenic traces are found very commonly. Now rice roots, the roots of rice plant also absorb arsenic from water and soil. Then what happens? Once it penetrates the outer layer, it's very easy for the entire crop, the entire edible part of the crop to get contaminated. Now what a paradox. Since the last few years, we've made this huge hue and cry about eating healthy, eating organic, eating non-processed. And many people, therefore, with higher income backgrounds have switched to consuming brown rice. But look what the article says. The article said that Lancet study clearly points out, since the arsenic gets contaminated in the outer part of the rice germ first, it's those people who consume the brown rice with the husk, they are more prone to arsenic contamination. Tell me what to do. So that's the sheer problem of anthropogenic damage to the climate, that you're not safe doing anything. And then of course you have the cooking water. Of course arsenic, when you cook rice, also penetrates your rice particle, the rice edible germ, and hence it's very easily penetrating into human bodies. So what could be the major causes behind this? Very clear. Of course, the global temperatures are rising. You know that when global temperatures rise, the activity of the bacteria, viruses, and various kind of pathogens like amoebas, like your, what do you call them, fungi, and of course your protozoas, they also change in nature. They mutate in a very different way, and therefore they become more threatening to humans because it's very, very parallel. Here rises the temperature, there humans' own gut biome changes, which makes your immunity compromised. And these organisms are multiplying on the other hand, so what happens then? They invade you faster, you lose your inherent capacity to deal with them. No wonder the world is experiencing constant pandemics and constant burden of NCDs. Okay, that's the problem we are talking about. So, rising temperature is a major cause. We know despite the Paris Agreement, despite the Kyoto Protocol, every year we are seeing few instances which proves that our glaciers and our ice caps are melting faster, which means the mean rise in global temperature is definitely at least 1 degree in just a bunch of few years. A very good example could be the melting of your Doomsday Glacier in Antarctica, one of the largest of its kind. That's also melting now. Yesterday, one newspaper highlighted the images of Himalaya mountains. Earlier, they were completely snow-capped. Today, only some part of it is snow-capped. So you see, these are the changes we are talking about. There is a higher level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Why? Because trees are less. When you cut down trees, deforestation, trees are the only agents of carbon sequestration. They are able to absorb carbon dioxide, giving you a clean air to breathe. And when there is none, what happens? Of course, the CO2 level rises, and this also enables rice roots to absorb more arsenic from the nature. Then we talk about extreme weather events, whether it's flooding or whether it's a complete lack of water, or whether we talk about things like, flash flooding that just it's going on in Jammu and Kashmir right now. All these also create a situation where the inorganic, dirty, leftover industrial waste, domestic waste, all of that goes further and gets contaminated in the groundwater. Ultimately, the toxicity of the water increases. And then, of course, you have the soil quality degradation. We all know ever since one of the very poor effects of Green Revolution was that it led to oil salinization, alkalization. When we know we have money to buy too much pesticide and fertilizer, as had happened during the 1960s Green Revolution, particularly in Tamil Nadu, Punjab, Haryana, UP. What was the result? Farmers were using too much of this. And then what happened? Suddenly, through capillary action inside the soil got alkaline. Soil got saline. It was not fertile anymore. So what will you do as a response? You will keep on adding more fertilizer, more pesticide. Again, same problem happens. It's a vicious circle. And ultimately what happens? Too much chemical, dangerous, inedible chemicals in soil would definitely erode the quality of your upper soil. What happens then? Of course, all these chemicals are bound to enter your food system. So what can we do now? What are the impacts that we face? So many. One thing is non-communicable diseases. NCD burden goes up, like cancers, tuberculosis of lungs and bone, like fertility problems we were talking about. Of course, we have hormonal problems like thyroids and all those things, cardiovascular diseases. Vulnerable groups, they are obviously more prone. The word vulnerable itself means you are more prone to a problem than other people who aren't vulnerable. So in India, typically it's the agricultural labor. Typically it's the tribal, typically it's the women, because women constitute the majority segment of agricultural labor apart from children. Mining workers, all these people are extremely vulnerable to these threats. Then nutrition and food security is at risk. You can do whatever fortification you want to do for your food under Poshan Abhiyan, but at the end of the day, if your food itself is toxic, then what fortification is really going to work for you? The bioavailability of food decreases. What's this? When I say bioavailability of food decreases, it means whatever nutrition you get from food, you will not absorb because of the toxic action of all these chemicals on your body. And of course, there are environmental risks. Arsenic, something as poisonous as lead, arsenic, things like nickel and all these various kind of toxins, they will not only disturb your marine life, but they will also kill your various kind of plants, native animals. So your biodiversity goes for a toss too. And some of the regions, as per the articles, which are at the highest risk are India, Bangladesh, Nepal, countries like Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, where you have tremendous rice consumption and rice production. In India, of course, some states are more prone, like West Bengal, UP, Bihar and Assam, which grow more rice, which have a massive kharif cultivation of rice. And then of course China, Pakistan. So wherever you have more irrigation from aquifers that are shallow, which can pull groundwater easily, wherever farmers are completely dependent on underground water, like Tamil Nadu in India is a good example, you are more prone. That was the article. Scary, right? Okay, so now we can look at another article that talks about a landmark judgment. What is this landmark judgment? The landmark judgment is called landmark because it's very, very revolutionary. Let's talk about 2022. I don't know how many of you really remember, but back in 2022, we remember that we had a very interesting conference that had taken place in Oman. This conference was one of its own kind because it spoke about how can the world community come together and fight against antimicrobial resistance. What is that? You've heard this before? Antimicrobial resistance means today we are living in an era of superbugs. What are superbugs? Pathogens or organisms that do not die despite antibiotic, antifungal usage. They will not die. Why? They're very powerful. They have already mutated so much that they tolerate all these medications and still they are alive. Why? What has made them so super? Our abuse of antibiotics has made them super. Just a few days back, we were discussing an article where too much of antibiotic use in poultry farms, too much of antibiotic use in controlling diseases in human communities has led to a situation where in the entire food web, food cycle, water cycle, we are experiencing traces of antibiotics. What does that lead to? It means your organisms that you experience danger from, all these pathogens which scare you, viruses, bacteria, protozoa, anything, fungi, they will become more powerful and one day will come, no amount of medication can cure them. Now if you remember back in 2020 and 2022, between this period, those patients who were getting COVID infection, later they were also developing diseases like black fungus or yellow fungus, and that was very deadly. It was very scary because health systems were not responding. It was a new thing for them. Why was it happening? Was it because of a high incidence of diabetes? Was it because of an unknown side effect of COVID? No, it was because too many doctors, due to lack of understanding of COVID complications, started giving antibiotics and antifungal medicines, hoping that this would cure COVID. But COVID was a virus, come on. It did respond. What actually happened, your immune system got compromised and all these funguses and all these kind of pathogens started attacking you. Because ultimately steroids, what do? What are steroids? They will suppress your immune system and hence you are more prone to diseases. So that vicious cycle also took the life of many patients, and today we have that kind of a problem in our health system. Not only India, globally. Of course, India has a higher rate of this. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, where the medical systems are lax when it comes to allowing people to buy over the counter antibiotics and serious drugs, scheduled edge drugs, wherever they can be purchased without a prescription. These problems are very common. Overuse and abuse of antibiotics, and that's what the article says. During 2022, Oman conference spoke about how can we fight the problem of antibiotic overuse and how can we kill these superbugs. Right? So today this article is exactly talking about something similar. The article says that today we are living in a world, we are living in a situation where COVID pandemic has already shown how poor the world community is, how weak, how fragile we are, how vulnerable we are to various serious diseases. Are we prepared? No, we are not prepared. Agreed, after the COVID pandemic, Indian government said that now we will invest 6% of our GDP in the healthcare sector. It was not happening earlier. That's again very shameful. But the government said we will do. Then what happens? Is that enough? Is it enough to have adequate hospitals? Is it enough to have adequate drug supply? No, it's not. Because there is something called preventive healthcare too. There's not just curative healthcare. You can't just let people fall sick assuming that you will cure them because you have better medicines, you have better, you can say, patenting mechanism for drugs, so you can make your own drugs. That's not the solution. That's just like prevention is always better. So we are saying that why can't we already prepare for a future pandemic, which if it comes is going to be worse, let alone your historical Spanish flu, let alone that had happened once. Even COVID-19 pandemic, the 3 years of struggle were good enough to show us that today not only are we underprepared in terms of supply, medical supply, but also there is global inequality between the rich and the poor countries. While the people in the poor countries had a piling of anti-COVID vaccines, poor countries had none. So that shows inequality in medical access too. Then there is World Health Organization, which is saying that what to do. Very soon you will have a disease X. What is disease X? A future pandemic. It's an imaginary name. But they are very sure it will come. They are saying this will come and this will be caused by superbugs. Superbugs will not die. Let's see how will you cure yourself. It's so scary, right? So that's why WHO Health Organization is saying let's do a preventive call. Let's create a pandemic treaty. We need it today because we are not properly equipped. So what is this pandemic treaty? Let's see. Pandemic treaty says that, or pandemic agreement says that, let's do an intergovernmental, various countries, it's a very multilateral, very democratic platform. Let's make a negotiation and let's completely adopt this pandemic treaty under the aegis of World Health Assembly. That's the legislative governing body of the World Health Organization, the decision-making body. It says that let's keep it like a generational accord, a decision that will be sustainable. It will impact the lives of future generations too. Let's have this under consideration and let's make sure that global health is taken care of. Now, why do we need another treaty? We need another treaty because today we see a huge economic gap between the poor and the rich countries. In fact, when COVID was going on, we were talking about something called vaccine imperialism. Remember, that meant that the rich countries have an over supply of antibiotics, but the poor countries were not getting anything. Rich countries had access to more protective gear and equipment. They already knew many more things about the pandemic, but the developing countries had no idea. Okay, so they were hit badly. So we need a mechanism which can create an equal platform for all these countries. And this also brings into focus the very important forum called Intergovernmental Negotiating Body. What is this INB? Let's quickly see. INB was created in one of the World Health Assembly session itself. What did it do? It had total 194 member states which are a part of the World Health Organization, and the intention was to create a draft in which we can be better prepared. We can have a more preventive action in the face of future pandemic. Of course, we can respond better in case that pandemic happens. And what initiatives could be coming under this? Of course, it means global help. The rich countries could help the poor countries with a higher rural population, with more poor population, with poor healthcare systems, to set up basic primary healthcare centers in a more voluminous way. In India, of course, we have them, but they are very less. That's why the sad thing is that even today, our dependence, Indians' dependence for healthcare needs is more on informal healthcare domains like Asha workers, Anganwadi, NGOs. It's less on institutional healthcare. So that's what we need to do. Apart from that, in case a pandemic comes, there has to be some platform which ensures smooth supply of vaccines across the globe. There should not be any vaccine hoarding. There should not be any lobbying of the pharmaceuticals that they refuse to give patents to other companies for trials. Why should you think of profit in the case of a pandemic? Okay, then similarly it was guided by the principle therefore of inclusivity, transparency and consensus. We need to show solidarity, unity in the face of a future pandemic. So some very important components of the pandemic agreement would be, the most important one I'll talk about, One Health approach. What is One Health approach? One Health approach under World Health Organization is an approach where you believe that any pathogen or any pathology, any disease is not only impacting one species. Like we can't say there is a disease that's only concerning humans, or there is a disease that only concerns animals, or there is a disease that only concerns plants. No. We have to understand that whether it's human, whether it's an animal or whether it's plants, all these are integral part of ecology. They're integrated completely. And therefore, today we are seeing the rise of zoonosis. What is zoonosis? Zoonotic diseases. Diseases which can keep jumping, transferring between, they can be contagious between humans and animals alike. Today we need no examples. It speaks for itself. Lumpy cow disease, tomato flu, swine flu, bird flu, COVID pandemic, you had the KFD disease in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala. What are all these? They are zoonotic. They can shift between humans and animals. So how can you say that they are all different species? So only veterinary will take care of animals and physicians will take care of humans? No. We need a forum where all come together and brainstorm something, because today we are living in an era of zoonosis. So the treatment has to be similar. We have to control these pathogens from becoming superbugs. Otherwise, all species will be equally impacted. Okay, so we need physicians, veterinary sciences, we need researchers, we need people with enough data, we need private companies and government support. That's called One Health Initiative. There is only one health mechanism for all the species across the world. Then it also believes on the principle of PABS, PABS. Pathogen access and benefit sharing. If a country has sufficient information about a pathogen that is creating disease, if they know certain things about the side effects, if they know certain things about symptoms and likely cure, it's their duty to share it across other countries through these multilateral forums like pandemic agreement. They have to do it. Remember, back in 2020, countries were blaming China alike. They said that under the aegis of WHO, the information did not reach other people on time, and therefore the vaccine development got super late. Already too much mortality had happened, so that's not something we are allowed to do anymore. Let's keep it democratic. Now again, there is politics here, because under Donald Trump, US had moved out of the treaty. So these things definitely are an impediment. But all in all, if adhered to, this could mean more transparency in health access. Similarly, we must include intergovernmental kind of situations where we are sharing our best of knowledge regarding medication or controlling diseases, and at the same time we should focus on knowledge transfer. Share whatever knowledge you know. Reach out on a consensus so that we can find a joint cure. Having said that, the key components of the agreement could be pharmaceutical companies, 10% of vaccine, whichever is produced in a country, should be donated to the World Health Organization so that the global supply chains are nourished. Another 10% can be sold at reasonable rates to people who need them. Poor developing countries like India had done during pandemic. India had made a mark there. Of course, you have to prioritize the safety of healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, NGO workers, and even workers who are in disaster management. We have to stop our dependence on external medicines. Even the raw material, the generic medicine also, we have to look for a little bit of self-dependency. Generic medications are too much imported from US and China. So that has to be controlled here. Atmanirbhar Bharat. Improve your capacity. Okay. So having said that, today we see a key inequality, a global divide between the developed countries, because they do not want to easily share information with regards to production technology of drugs, equipments of medical nature. Similarly, we have to make sure that there is affordable distribution of treatment, vaccines, and all those protective gears. Developing countries are actually kind of hesitating to share their samples taken from humans, sample taken from their bodies, without guarantees of sufficient results that they will get. So that kind of hesitation has to be bridged for a common solution. So of course we know that there is pharmaceutical lobbying, where some countries do not want to share their IPR rights to other countries so that they can achieve all the profit. Similarly, of course, you have vaccine imperialism, vaccine nationalism, that I am not going to help other countries. My vaccines are meant for my citizens. That's a very poor idea, because ultimately in today's globalized world, if there is an epidemic in one area, it will become a pandemic unless controlled. Similarly, we could say that in the last pandemic, we saw many Asian and African countries, they kept on waiting without any much results. So that should be avoided. Okay. Now, what's the way forward? We have to have a better monitoring, better implementation, better solidarity. Now, that also reminds me of, does India have any such interventions to take care of its people in the case of pandemic or in case of any other health disaster? Yes, we do have. Of course, we talk about the National Disaster Management Authority. Okay. That was created long back under the Disaster Management Act 2005 to mitigate in case any health disaster happens. Then of course we can also talk about the, India's government ministries who make plans time to time to make sure that medicines whether it's reproductive health or whether it's preventive health, they are disbursed through primary healthcare centers and Anganwadi into the rural areas. And of course, we also talk about the National Center for Disease Control. Of course, you have the Pune Institute of Virology. Yesterday it was also in the news regarding some copyright and data sharing. So these are certain initiatives that have to be boosted further. And now we can move on to another polity-based article. This talks about how a very, you can say, radical comment made by India's Honorable Vice President Sri Jagdeep Dhankar has created waves of controversy. And what exactly has he said? He has questioned judiciary's transparency, integrity and power. Why? This statement particularly became very, very debatable because he said that SC has no right to set up timelines for constitutional posts like president and governors. It is coming in the wake of one of the arguments given by Supreme Court that they should have timelines even for these posts, some tenure. But he says no, they are overriding their jurisdiction. So again, this article is a grim reminder of the constant debate between transparent democracy and judicial activism. Okay, let's remember that all this happens because India again is one country where we have a synthesis. Synthesis of what? We believe in a synthesis of parliamentary sovereignty mixed with judicial supremacy. We are quite unlike UK and US here, because talking about UK, of course, we see that here there is a complete parliamentary supremacy, and talking about US, you have judicial supremacy, you have judicial activism, that's in a very high amount. So India having a middle ground, such questions become relevant. So today the statement given by our Vice President is quite relevant for GS paper 2. It talks about organization of judiciary, centralized justice system, transparency in the judiciary system. So there's a previous year question relating to this, that's 2020 UPSC. It says judicial legislation is antithetical. It is against the doctrine of separation of powers as designed as envisaged in our constitution. In this context, justify the filing of large number of PILs, public interest litigations, issuing guidelines to executive authorities. So again, we are talking about the same thing. Okay, so let's see the critical issues covered by the article. So broadly, the article talks about three things here. One is Article 142. Another thing that the article talks about is Article 145 Clause 3. And then again the article talks about how if judicial review is a basic structure of Indian constitution as envisaged in the Keshwanand Bharati case in 1973, then it is something that we have to think about. Okay, then why today are we raising a question on judicial independence and judicial supremacy? If it's a part of basic structure of constitution, then why is it even a problem? So on that note, let's quickly see. So why has judiciary been criticized? So according to Dr. Dhankar, the main concern is that he said that there is a lack of transparency in open inquiry process. Now recently, there was a big controversy where some amount of money was discovered in the residential areas of one of the High Court judges, and therefore this article points out to how there was not enough inquiry, transparent investigation was not done. So this is like hiding reality from public. Another thing the article says is that we are having issues with the collegium appointment, because the article says, say long back, there were only a bench of say 8 judges in the Supreme Court or about 5 judges in the Supreme Court. So even if you talk about Article 145(3) of the Indian Constitution, it says that we need a minimum of 5 judges. And today we are seeing a situation where we have 34 judges because it is appointed through the collegium system. So it questions, do we really need that many? Or having this many, is it necessary to ensure transparent jurisdiction? So therefore the article says that let's have some reform, some more democratic, transparent reform in the National Judicial Appointments Commission, so that there has to be better clarity on exactly how many judges are needed. So the system that the collegium follows looks like it's mired in secrecy. That's not okay for a transparent democracy. Another concern raised by the article is about the use of Article 142 by the Supreme Court. Although the article appreciates also, it says during the time of Bhopal gas tragedy, when you had the Union Carbide versus the Indian government case back in the 1991, it was said that Supreme Court had used its superpowers under Article 142, where if the Supreme Court feels that there is some injustice being done or there is not enough dispensation of justice, it will step in and help. It will arbitrate. It has the right to do that. So in that case, it had ensured that the victims of the Bhopal gas tragedy get enough compensation. Similarly, during the Vishakha case, which later became the rockbed of our POSH Act, Prevention of Sexual Harassment at the Workplace. So in both these cases, the government had taken immediate call, so which is very good. That shows the necessity of judicial activism sometimes to ensure proper justice. But despite that, the article is criticizing the overuse of Article 142. It says that sometimes it undermines representative democracy where too much interference happens by the courts. Similarly, the article also says that Article 142 sometimes is being used by the Supreme Court in such a way that it looks as if they are not ready to issue a mandamus. Mandamus? A kind of compulsion, judicial command. They are not creating a kind of mandamus, judicial command, when it comes to the question of constitutional heads. So why should it use it in the case of executive heads? So these are the kind of points the article is completely asking, and these are the points of criticism raised against the Supreme Court. Now here, since we have covered some important concepts, let's quickly break it down for the exam. Say judicial activism. Too much interference or too much arbitration by the Supreme Court. It refers to a very proactive judicial approach. Here we talk about the Article 142, like the Vishakha case, which led to the protection of sexual harassment for women in the workplace. That was a major intervention. Similarly, Bhopal gas tragedy, as I had told you. And yet, we today say that sometimes too much judicial activism defeats the purpose of constitution, where the powers are clearly divided between the legislative, judiciary and the executive. So too much judicial activism like US would undermine separation of constitutional powers in India, and it's not really good for a very transparent legislation in the Indian society. Having said that, today let's also understand that there is another debate. As I mentioned to you, the 1973 Keshwan and Bharti case, which is also referred to in polity as the basic structure case. This case says that judicial review absolutely is a part of basic structure of the constitution, and after Keshwan and Bharti case, you cannot change, alter the basic structure of the constitution at all, come what may. So today, why are you questioning judicial activism? Okay, so we should look at a balanced coexistence where neither we are talking about too much interference by judiciary, some transparency in the process, particularly in the collegium process and in the process of issuing mandamus or judicial commands when the case pertains judges, like the High Court judge and the money issue that came up. Apart from that, we must understand some amount of judicial intervention, Article 142, has also been very protective for Indian society all in all. And that brings us to the last article of the day. This says how world's first market for trading in particulate emission. Now you might have heard these words very commonly: air pollution, air quality index, particularly in the context of Delhi, National Capital Region. In the winter seasons, during the stubble burning season, every year New Delhi registers a very top position in some of the most polluted cities in the world. Of course, AQI, air quality index, is very poor. Why? You might have read in the newspapers there is particulate matter. So particulate matter, whether you call it 10 or whether you call it particulate matter 2.5, these are various kind of particles suspended in the air, typically comprising of waste such as dust, dander, carbon, pollution, particles, all of that. So when they become too much in concentration, when their density increases in the air, it means it causes diseases. It's difficult then, because the clean air you are not breathing, and therefore your lungs, your bronchi in the lungs will not be able to filter them out very successfully, posing a danger to you. Danger of air toxicity. So that's what the article is saying. If it's such a dangerous thing, then India has really done a great job, in fact a commendable job, by creating the first global market for trading in particulate emission or in particulate matter. So you might ask, what is this trading all about, and how can we trade in the particulate matter? So before we say, let's quickly have a look at the question. CSAT 2021. The common carbon metric supported by United Nations Environmental Program has been developed for, and of course you have 4 options dealing with carbon footprint. That's the limit of carbon that one particular individual or organization or a unit emits. We are talking about commercial farming, we are talking about fossil fuel. So you could just try to solve this question. It relates to air pollution. Now, India has launched in Surat, in Gujarat, the first trading market for carbon emissions. Now, the word carbon trading is not new. It's coming since the last few years. It's a decade-old word already. But why this article is unique? Because today we are talking about how interestingly this Surat-based trading market works. Okay, it's based on the principle that is known as cap and trade system. So let's quickly understand in the article, what do you mean by cap and trade system? Now, a cap and trade system is one such system which talks about how carbon emissions can be traded between different companies. What's the motive? How will it help you? It helps you because when you talk about old, conventional kind of pollution controlled mechanisms, now whether it be through energy conservation amendment that had happened in 2022, or whether it be happening through your electricity amendment act that had happened in 2023, or whether it be about the green credit program, national green tribunal, all these are okay, but they are very, very regulatory in nature. People don't abide so easily. There is defaulting going on. So a very smart solution, a very innovative solution is create a market for that, just like a stock market. Here what happens, the clear process is that when you go for a cap and trade system, then allocation happens. Different companies will get some kind of emission rights. Okay, it depends on how much carbon emission they are actually secreting. So those who are secreting too much, who really need to do a lot of carbon emission in the production process, can actually purchase emission rights from those companies which are not secreting enough carbon. So they have extra credits. So the companies which need to do less pollution can sell these emission rights to those companies which really have to emit more. So what does it lead to? It leads to a fear. Suppose I am a company and I have huge carbon emission. I know that there is an upper limit to the level of carbon I can emit. I cannot go on creating pollution, so the government will either fine me. So the only solution is to do carbon trading. Let me buy some rights. But what happens when I'm buying? I have to invest money into it. So will that be profitable to me? No. It defeats the whole purpose of my production process. Rather than aiming for a higher profit, if for every unit production, whatever carbon I emit, I have to buy that right from some other company, then I will lose my money. So why not better I start controlling my carbon emission? So it's on the basis of creating a very capitalistic, a very, very profit oriented mechanism on emission system. That's how it works. Okay. So therefore, cap would mean total emission that is allowed, which you can buy. A good example here would be 170 tons per month after a thorough evaluation, and various companies can either buy these permits or sell these permits depending on their pollution output. So it's a very smart system. Okay, so why was Surat only chosen in Gujarat? Surat was chosen because Surat has the concentration of about more than 300 very, very polluting textile and chemical factories. So that's the reason it was chosen, to actually put an upper cap on the level of pollution that you do. Now believe me, it's not a new concept. Today in India, we are doing it in a very domestic way, but otherwise globally also such credit system exists. Now, traditional regulation was not being followed. There was a complete deviance, there was a defaulting. So therefore this has become a more transparent, flexible institutional system in which you don't have to hide, you don't have to really do a kind of cheating. It's very clear. If I need to pollute, I will have to buy. So therefore I will control my pollution. It's as simple as that. You are doing some kind of monetary incentivization of reducing air pollution, and that's the beauty of the whole process. Of course, there is an auction system here in which the buyers are able to buy certain emission rights, the sellers will also place certain bids, and ultimately there has to be a fixed price based on the demand supply, based upon a very market like structure. Okay, so there are some precautions that these companies must take. For example, you have to make sure that you are only releasing as much pollution as your permit limit allows, otherwise you will be fined for it. Plus, fines will be deducted from the entire bond before every financial cycle starts, and people actually feel that rather than getting a fine, rather than being punished by the government, rather than my license being revoked, I better become more eco-friendly. So that's the spirit of the whole system. Inculcate awareness among people by incentivizing them rather than blankly forcing them with do's and don'ts. There are clear achievement stories here. For example, particulate matter pollution came down by 20 to 30% once the ETS system was implemented. There is a lower compliance and abatement cost. Constantly police and the authorities and the tribunals running behind you, issuing you notice, That's a waste of time, energy, and money. So that's not happening here because the system is very transparent. Similarly, it also creates a very important financial incentive to adopt cleaner technology, and at the same time, since it is based on real-time data, there is no opaqueness in the whole process. Okay, of course, there are certain challenges, like there is always a risk of gaming the system, hijacking the system, taking advantage of the system. If you are a rich funded company, it is almost like creating a monopoly of the richer companies over poor companies. So that's always a divide that we talk about. Also, some plants who have a higher emission tendency, suddenly for saving profits, if they try to reduce it, it also might lead to higher input cost and suffering of the entire business cycle. So all those things are there. There is a lack of clear future guideline about how politically this will be taken forward. But despite that, all in all, it's very much in line with India's clean air program. It's absolutely in line with how to control certain such places like New Delhi or the entire national capital region, which is a hotbed of various electricity plants, coal plants. So in those places it can really work very, very well. And now, having said that, on to the main question. The question says it's about creative economy. India's creative economy is rich in grassroots creativity. We already spoke that how in the rural segment, how in the very local village level segment, people are very creative in India. Culinary talent, art and textile, okay, pottery, of course we have various kind of crafts, handicrafts. But despite that, there is no innovation, scalable innovation. We cannot monetize or commercialize our business successfully. How do you bridge this gap? Please discuss, because that's the only way to create sustainable growth. So please introduce the problem and introduce the keywords. Define the keywords in the intro. That's what I always tell you. What's a creative economy? Economy where value addition is coming from activities such as intellectual ideas, art, craft, textile, handicraft, various kinds of designs into software or infrastructure like architecture, even of course in your consumer goods segment. India has a rich tendency of that, we know. You could always give an example of the Mythicool refrigerator. You could always give the example of things like the bamboo drip, agriculture, and the bun stream technology that we spoke about, all of that. Then, of course, you can quickly discuss the problem. The problem is that these people have a lack of institutional credit. There is poor credit absorption, particularly among women. Another thing is there is biopiracy. Another problem is there is a lack of IPR and copywriting. Third thing is there is a lack of expansion because of lack of guidance, and even schemes like Skill India, Startup India are slightly difficult to be absorbed by the people until there are enough intermediaries to reach out to the people at the grassroots level. And then please come to the body, give a very detailed reason about why is the gap there. How do we mitigate the gap? Of course, the gap is there because today we have a very poor intellectual property right protection mechanism. So you could talk about how informal workers therefore could benefit from systems like the sui generis system we spoke about, by local communities becoming the nodal centers for issuing copyrights via the government approval, of course, to enable them from being protected against biopiracy. We could talk about limited money at the grassroots level. So definitely we could talk about creating a similar system like self-help group, even in the innovation sector, like we have done in certain other sectors, particularly the village rural women sector. We could do something similar even in innovation and business. Of course, we talk about how digital divide between the urban and the rural people is a major reason behind this. This gap is very crucial to be fulfilled, otherwise we are wasting demographic dividend. Otherwise, we are wasting our talent innovation, because we know not everybody will be able to accommodate in the formal job market. So why not find a middle ground? Rather than seeing a high degree of vulnerable unemployment, structural unemployment, seasonal unemployment, we'd better allow people entrepreneurship ability. That's what. So please give measures how to stop the gap from happening. That's exactly what we spoke about. Better institutional credit, better awareness of IPR, stopping biopiracy, creating more democratized structure of IPR issuing. All of that is important here. And then you could conclude by saying that if creative economy becomes successful, then definitely it could lead to more startup cultures in India, more young people getting into entrepreneurship, including women, including the vulnerable. Similarly, we could also say that these could be climate friendly solutions like the Mythicool solution we spoke about. Of course, giving rural technologies international recognition means you are also promoting your culture in a major way. Okay, so it will also automatically boost economic growth, but as well as your culture. So this could lead to a more inclusive, sustainable and very innovation led growth in India. Now on that note, there are some brilliant questions here for you to see and solve. Okay, some of them, and most of them are based into the articles that we have discussed today. And on that note, I'd like to take your leave for today's DNA segment. I hope you enjoyed the articles we discussed today. And as I said last time, I do look forward to some of your comments and views, which could only make us reach out to you in a better way. You know, the more you understand a student's need, the better you can address them. And prelims is just a few weeks away now, so all the best, and keep tuning into these DNAs, because not only are we breaking down tough news for you, but also we are helping you in analyzing critical important issues from the perspective of answer writing. And having said that, thank you so much and all the very best. And always subscribe, follow and tune into Narayana IS Academy, because here your dreams are our dreams. Thank you.